Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric on our continuing series, the Unported playlist, where we take a look at some of my favorite unported arcade games of all time. And today we're taking a look at Sega's 1993 release, Alien 3: The Gun. And I always call these games light gun shooters because that's how I think of them in my head. But just like Beastbusters that we showed a while ago, this is actually an XY coordinate game. So you have a gun mounted to the cabinet, and it's taking X and Y data off two potentiometers to give you your crosshair. So unlike light gun games, these games are actually easier to use at home. I'll talk about that in a little bit, but let's just talk about the game in general. I'm a huge fan of the Alien franchise. I've always loved the films and some of the originals with the great visual effects, and this game is just flat out super fun. It's in the Alien franchise, obviously, it's set in that world, but as far as the gameplay and the mechanics are concerned, it is an action-packed, lively game from start to finish. It never really gives you a break, except right before boss fights, and I do like that. But I am definitely an impartial reviewer on this one because all sorts of light gun games or XY coordinate games, I'm a fan of basically all of them. It's always been one of my favorite genres to play in arcades because it always felt like something different that you could play at home, holding that giant gun with the motor in it that's giving you feedback for your shots in your hand. And that's something that definitely you don't get on a console. I mean, some console games, you do have light gun games, but it's not the same as arcades. But as far as the graphics and everything are concerned, the game looks amazing. It's running on Sega's Super 32 arcade board, so you get a ton of great sprite scaling, and it really feels like you're playing an on-rails first-person shooter going through all these corridors. It just looks great. As far as the difficulty is concerned, it can definitely be a harder game. Towards the end, I am pumping in a lot of credits, and definitely you could turn it down in the board settings, but I like to play all the games with their stock difficulty, how they came, to see what it would have been experienced like in the arcade had the operator not adjusted anything. So I will say, it's definitely a fun game, it's a challenging game, it looks great. As far as replayability is concerned, there really aren't any branching paths. So once you've played the game once, you've seen everything it has to offer, but honestly that's the truth for most arcade games. So really, it's not a critique so much as if you're a collector of these games, you definitely have to go in knowing that it's not something you're going to play daily. But I wish this one did get a port because it would have been super easy to do on something like the Wii. Obviously with the Wiimote, this would have been a quick and easy conversion. I mean, granted, you have to code it over to use the Wii's PowerPC processor versus what Sega used. But as far as the controls are concerned, it would have been something that would have been pretty easy to translate over to that Wiimote with the crosshair. Definitely not as accurate as XY potentiometer data, but you're going to get close enough so it's playable because there's a lot of instances of light gun games on the Wii that play perfectly fine. So it's disappointing this didn't come out, but I could probably understand why because it's a licensed game, obviously, dealing from the Alien franchise, so maybe by the time that there was a control system at home that would have worked for it, they may not have had the license anymore. You definitely could have brought it out on the Saturn and used a control pad, but translating an XY coordinate game to a light gun game is definitely going to require some more coding because one uses light data from a sensor and takes the refresh rate of the screen to say what you're pointing at versus this where it's basically just giving you a crosshair and you're using what amounts to an analog stick in a gun to be able to control everything on screen. So there's definitely some adjustment. And now that we've gotten through that first stage, I just showed it to you from start to finish because I love it so much. We're moving on to stage 2. And this game is long. I think it took me about a half an hour to play from start to finish, and granted I did have to burn through a lot of continues to be able to finish it, but it's not too short. It's that perfect length of like 30-35 minutes depending on how good you are. Because with a lot of these games, if they're 15-20 minutes, they kind of feel like they end before they've started, and if they're longer than 35-40 minutes, you start feeling maybe a little bit bored. And you will see here now we have a flamethrower, and you are able to upgrade your gun slightly with power-ups. The flamethrower definitely kills enemies quicker, but you have to let them get closer to you. So there is a trade-off between having the ability to kill them in a second versus killing them at a distance, because if you don't aim that flamethrower perfectly, like you saw right there, I was still able to take damage. And there's our first continue. I will say that some enemies pop up and attack you before you really know where they are. And you'll see at the bottom left-hand corner, the gun does have a power meter, so you can't just hold the trigger down and be firing, spraying all across the screen and hoping you hit everything, because once that power meter goes too low, you have to release the trigger for it to recharge. And if it runs out completely, the recharge takes slightly longer than if you let go of the trigger while you still have power in it. So you have to definitely judge how you want to use your shots. And I will say that it can sometimes feel a little bit quarter munchery, because it seems like the minute you let off the trigger, something's going to pop up directly in front of you and take some of your life bar away, and that can sometimes be frustrating. And if I was in an arcade, I don't think I would have put enough money in to finish this. I saw this arcade cabinet back in the day, and I think I played it once, but I wasn't a huge fan of the Alien films then, so I probably just moved on to something else. But in intervening years, I've definitely become a much bigger fan of it, you know, with collecting PCBs, with loving light gun games. You'll see there I just blew off some grenades. You do have those screen clearing grenades in case you get into a tough spot, and they refresh with every life, but you're not going to pick too many of them up in each level. They're definitely going to be sparse. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop talking, let you guys hear some of the soundtrack. It's definitely good, if not subdued, and I'll be back in just a second to finish up the video on Alien 3 The Gun, but I want you guys to hear and appreciate what it sounds like without me talking over it, so I'll be back in a second. So we hope you enjoyed being able to hear and see the game without me talking over it, because I do like, you know, you guys to get a sense of the visual effects of all the soundtrack and everything like that. And I do love how we transition into this sunset scene right here, and the colors in the game smoothly go from really Spartan and blue and cold to this really rich, warm red. And I appreciate that the graphic designers and artists were definitely thinking about stuff like that, because even if the stage can sometimes feel a little bit long, as that visual transition happens, it definitely feels like I'm playing something a little bit fresher, and at least for me, I do appreciate things like that. Now, if you are a collector of these type of games, you want to get into it, I will say that these are some of the easier arcade games to convert to home controls, outside of games that just use a joystick and buttons, because you can just plug in a controller into a super gun and deal with those. But I do have a series up on converting Beastbuster Second Nightmare for the Hyper Neo Geo 64, because pretty much all of these arcade PCBs that use XY coordinates can be translated over to using a computer flight stick or another device that has those XY coordinates. So you might think a game like this isn't going to be playable at home as a collector, but you certainly can buy it, and all you need to do is figure out what points that the X and Y data are supposed to be going to and where your 5-volt and your grounds are, and then you can basically spoof that flight stick to work on a game like this. If you know what you're doing, you know, the pin crimping and soldering takes about 20 minutes. Most of the time they have research of figuring out where those pins are supposed to go is going to be the longest time, but if this has a great manual for it that has a full pin out, so with the right parts, I could totally convert this over to work on my television at home in half an hour to an hour, depending on, you know, how small the pins were. So don't think that these type of games you can't collect, because you certainly can. If you're a, you know, hardcore arcade PCB collector, definitely start getting into converting things, because while this is great on emulation, it would be really fun with a flight stick in the hand, because I used an Xbox 360 analog controller to play this, and while it does still feel really good, having that flight stick in the palm of your hand with a trigger underneath your index finger definitely feels like the more proper way to play something like Alien 3 The Gun. But do I recommend this game? Absolutely. If you're a fan of the Alien franchise, it's one of the best Alien games we've ever gotten, because the console games weren't very good. And if you're a fan of what I call light gun shooters, even if it is XY coordinate games, you're definitely going to get a lot of fun out of this as well. And I haven't seen an arcade cabinet for it in years, so if you see one, definitely play it. Short of that, thanks so much for watching. Do us a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring the notification bell. It takes us a lot of time and energy to make each one of these videos. We'll be back on Sunday with another one, and then we'll have videos on Tuesday and Friday. But thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.